So thank you for coming tonight. I'm super happy to introduce my friend, tonight's guest speaker. And she's coming to us by way of Zambia and the Peace Corps. And she's currently the on-campus Peace Corps recruiter. So it's really lucky that Missoula is such a popular recruitment site that we get our own Peace Corps recruiter. And in Zambia, she was working as an agricultural volunteer, and her degree is actually not in agriculture, it's in journalism and natural resources from Wayne State University, which is in Michigan. But we're so delighted to have you here. And will you tell us a little bit about your degree here, what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm an environmental studies grad student now working on a master's degree. And I'm focusing a lot on human connections to the land, community building, hopefully a little education. And I think a lot of that actually was influenced by my Peace Corps service as well, to whereas I had the environmental and natural resource interests, but I became even more interested in working with people.
And you sound like a sociologist, because we have sociology of the community and of the environment.
Yeah,
So you know,
yeah.
we'll twist your arm and make
There
you
you
a
go.
sociologist.
That's the problem with environmental studies people. We're generalists, a lot of us. Not some of us are engineers, but many of us are generalists.
Is it all right if we have questions as you go, if we interrupt
Oh
you?
yeah, and please do. I mean, this is a long chunk of time. So I mean, just jump in. Yeah, it would make me happy. You're actually listening. So yeah, feel free to ask questions. And yeah, I actually wanted to ask too, because this is about international development. How many of you guys have had some kind of intercultural experience in your lives?
Oh, you're having one now?
Yeah, you're here in America. That's a huge. Are you guys both born and raised in Montana?
No, I was born in Florida, but we moved around from my dad's military.
Okay. Do you feel like it was different cultural places wherever you?
I mean, no, not really.
Nah. Okay. Yeah. I think sometimes culture can be defined pretty broadly, and just to keep that in mind. So as I'm going to be talking a lot about Zambia and what development was like in Zambia. But I think anytime you go to a different community and you're trying to do development work, it's there's always some things that are like, oh, this is different. I'm not from here, so just things to keep in mind. Oh, it's down. Okay. So yeah, this is the little intro on me. Zambia, in case you didn't know where it was, down in kind of South Central Africa. I was an agriculture volunteer in forestry, did a lot of secondary things that I can talk about later if you have questions. And my language was Chibemba. I did not properly greet you. Mwapoleni mukwai bonse. So thank you for coming.
Did you just say hello?
I literally said, "You are well," with great respect, because that's a common greeting. Vemba greetings are great because they're all situational. You would say, oh, "You've woken well." "Ah, you are working." "Ah, you are eating." They're all sort of situational. So I could say, "Ah, moi sambilileni mukwai." You are studying. All those things. So just a little bit about Peace Corps Zambia, because again, that's going to be my context for talking about this. Someone I know called it the National Geographic experience, meaning I didn't have electricity or running water. It's that kind of stereotypical what you think of old school Peace Corps, but that's increasingly not common. A lot of Peace Corps volunteers now live in apartments with running water and electricity, and some have wireless internet. So you just never know. But in Zambia, we did have some spotty cell phone service, kind of like Montana, really. And we all got bikes. That's that picture. And this is not my house there in the top left, but it's two of my Peace Corps volunteer friends. It's a fairly typical Peace Corps house. Hers was a little nicer painted than some. And that adorable child is Agri with a bowl of caterpillars on his head, which I can tell you about later. These are the 4 programs that are in Zambia. Every country is a little different. Every country has a different combination of Peace Corps programs. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to keep in mind that when you're thinking about intercultural development, you're considering the culture, and that's rooted in the history of a place. The oldest skull ever discovered, it may have changed now, but was discovered in Kabwe, Zambia. So obviously people have been there for hundreds of thousands of years. And the Bantu, which is the various peoples that live throughout southern and Central Africa now, were Africa's first farmers, so a long, long, long history of farming. And yeah, they kind of were a little late. They didn't get slave traders and Europeans and things coming in until a little later than a lot of Africa because they were landlocked. And yeah, it's mainly a Christian nation now, and there's a lot of copper mining, which also started in the colonial era, or large-scale copper mining started in the colonial era. The Bantu also were the first people in Zambia to make iron tools, so they were mining all kinds of things. Again, they were a colony for a while, and then their first president, KK, he really emphasized ethnic harmony and intermarriage and sending people from one area of the country to work with different tribes in another area. So Zambia has been very fortunate in that they call each other tribal cousins and joke, and yeah, it's a very peaceful place. And there's 72 different tribes, all with their own different languages. So again, you start to see sort of things that might be challenging for development. Any questions about that?
Yeah, what are the Chinese and Indians doing coming to Zambia?
That's a great question. A lot of the Indians, and again, most of the immigrants are in big cities. I was in a very rural area. The cities in Zambia, I mean, there are shopping malls and all kinds of things. But where I was, those things don't exist. So most immigrants are in those more developed city areas. A lot of the Indians own shops. There's traditional fabrics, which you'll see a lot of, this is made out of that, Tenge fabric that women wear. And a lot of the Indians were selling those, various business people. The Chinese, I don't know how much you guys know about this, but China is increasingly looking for areas to grow more food, to have products to export to and import to. So there's a lot of business people from China as well. But mainly in the cities, they're branching out a little bit more though, increasingly. They were a little bit in my area too. But yeah, basically just looking for opportunities for trade and commerce like most nations do.
So both of these groups are pretty recent.
Yeah.
From the colonial era.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, much more recent. And also some of the white population is from South Africa and especially Zimbabwe. A lot of white farmers who, if you know the history of Zimbabwe, have kind of got kicked out of Zimbabwe and came to Zambia. And then you have people who have lived there for generations as well. But overwhelmingly Black African American in Zambia. Unlike a lot of, like South Africa might have bigger populations of white people, but not so much. Huh?
African American? African, right?
African, yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right, and then that map is just map of the various tribes in Zambia, so just kind of gives you an idea. I was right there. Yeah, you're just right on time. So that arrow up in the top right, you can see my village was Mfuba village, and Kumwesu. I threw in a lot of Bemba here because why not? There's no word for home in Bemba that I ever discovered, but Kumwesu is like our place. And so I was right between the towns of Kasama and Luingu there. Very not developed area. We were only 6 kilometers from a paved road, but it had just been paved 2 years previously. And it was just southern Zambia. When you think of Victoria Falls is down here, a lot of the national parks that they're known for are all down here in the southern and eastern provinces. Up in the north, I never saw a tourist, except one time I went to Lake Tanganyika, way up there, which borders Tanzania, and then I saw a few tourists. But it's just a lot. It's less developed. They get less help from the government, hardly any tourists, so it's a little more isolated.
So you were the only American there, huh?
Yes, I'm glad you phrased it that way. I've heard people say, were you the only person in your village? And I was like, or were you the only one in your village? And I was like, No, everyone, but yes, I was the only American in my village. And again, Peace Corps varies a lot. If you're in a big city, you might have other volunteers around. I was 70 kilometers from the nearest volunteer, but a lot of volunteers, usually you would have a volunteer within 20, 30 kilometers of you. But I was the only American, the only white person in my village. Oh. And did you guys have any questions about the history or any of that stuff? Okay. Just feel free to shout things out. Pafia Mfuba, this is about Mfuba. This is my village specifically. So again, 72 different languages and cultures in Zambia. Things can be very different from place to place, but this is about my village. That culture of sharing and respect is huge. That when I said Mwapoleni Mukwai, Mukwai is, you can tack that onto anything. It just means respect. There's a lot of like, bend your knees. And these things, come into play a lot when you don't want to offend people or you're learning how things are. Everyone there was a subsistence farmer. People did sell their crops on a pretty limited basis, but for the most part they were growing for their families. Maize was the biggest crop that was sold to the government, and then some traders would come through and buy beans. And these are the distances of things, but no one had a vehicle in my village. So you're like, oh, 7 kilometers, 11 kilometers, that's not that big of a deal. But distances become huge when all you have is a bicycle, and for children and most women, just your feet. So yeah, these are some of my kids. Can I use this? There we go. So these are some of my kids here walking to school in their school uniforms, walking up that road. Yeah, one of our great gardeners with some sugar cane, and yeah, everything in my village. And again, this is different in other parts of Zambia, but in my village, there were no oxen, there were no donkeys. Everything, all farming was done by hand. So really strong people.
Just diseases or something? They had no oxen or donkeys or horses, or just they're too expensive for them?
Yeah, I mean, at this moment, it's because they're too expensive. I think historically, I mean, Zambia is on a plateau of about 5,000 feet, so I don't think tsetse fly is a huge deal. I know that, again, in southern and eastern Zambia, those people are traditionally cattle herders, and the Bemba people are just not. There's a lot of chickens, some pigs, some goats, but yeah, they're just not. And there's an interesting, people from the south and the east tease the Bemba a lot, because the Bemba people eat caterpillars and flying termites and bushrat and all these things, and they think they're delicious. And people in the south are like, oh, I would never eat those things, even though they do. But I don't, because we have cattle. So there's this interesting little rivalry. But yeah, not a whole lot of livestock in my area. And again, that Bemba culture, these guys kneeling down here, this is before a chief, but yeah, if you go to the chief, you would just kneel down with great respect. A lot of celebrations, if there's a wedding, or especially if there's a funeral, everything stops. I mean, the whole village comes out, and you're just really not doing anything else. Huge families. This is a rare picture of an extended family who lived in my area of the village, and that's, I don't know, maybe a third of them. Cousins are running around together, and it's hard to tell whose kids are whose, and there it doesn't really matter because everyone's taking care of one another's kids, and you might go to someone's house and they have 7 kids, but only 4 of them are there, and then 2 of someone else's kids are there, and the other kids are off eating somewhere else, and that's really common. And then I would be remiss in talking about Bemba culture if I did not mention ubwali, which is, this food specifically is very common. I'm sure Peter is familiar with this as well. It's called different things in different places, fufu, ugali, I'm sure names I don't know. But what was it called in Tanzania?
Ugali.
Yeah, ugali, yeah, that's what
Uganda's kosher.
Okay, yeah, but it's basically what you do is you boil water. You boil it until it's like a rolling boil, and then you take whatever kind of flour you have and you keep putting it in and stirring and stirring and stirring until it gets so thick you can barely stir it. And in my area, it was made mostly out of maize or millet or cassava flour, and that's it. There's no nothing, but it's the thing that you pick up with everybody eats with their hands, so you pick it up, you roll it in your hands, and you use it to scoop up the other dishes that are there, vegetables or mushrooms or whatever, chicken if you're lucky. And yeah, it's basically tasteless, but it is the carbohydrate that fills you up, and it's the thing that you scoop up all the other food with.
So this is
Yeah.
the rice in Japan. Or
Yeah.
the here we eat so many things but spaghetti and bread.
Yeah, or pizza, or yeah, it's like people, yeah, so like this is like the Zambian pizza. It's like the thing that everyone
It
eats.
looks kind of like marshmallow or ice cream.
Yeah, yeah.
Your description of how it tastes is
Yeah, if only. That's why I said it. If only it tasted that good. But it's one of those things. I mean, it's an acquired taste. I think most Peace Corps volunteers go in and just like, I mean, this is, you know, this whole thing about international development and the Peace Corps sort of philosophy on this, which I'm sort of getting to, is that, you know, you're integrating into a community, you're living there for 2 years. And so most Peace Corps volunteers start out being like, what is this? And some volunteers never are like, I learned to love it. Like, I kind of miss it. People think that's crazy, but I'm not the only one who felt that way. I'm like, oh, where's my Wally? But it's such a part of the culture, and I mean, I cannot emphasize it enough. People, when I came back, be like, how will you ever be satisfied without Ubwali? What are you going to do? I mean, it's just, it is what they eat 2 to 3 meals a day, every day. And so, because sharing and everything is such a part of the culture, you end up eating with people a lot, and they love that. And if you don't eat with people, they're really sad, and they think, why aren't you eating with us? So you end up eating a lot of Ubwali because you hang out with people. So some of Mfuba's challenges, again, looking from a development standpoint, they definitely have a growing population, shrinking natural resources. My area, people actually migrated to Mfuba Village in the 80s just from like 10 kilometers away because farmland was getting scarce. It's hard to store and keep food year round, and this is, you will love this photo. These are called sekseki, and this was, these are one of the 2 rodents that will eat all your food if you store it, because you just store it in these bags, and so rats and things will eat it. And these are 3 that I caught. This was like 3 nights in a row. They were nesting in my roof. So like, you know, if you have bags of maize and bags of beans and cassava in your house, like it's hard to, you know, you want to sell those things and get the money, and then so it's hard to keep food year round. Poor soils. They have a really strong rainy season, and so that tends to deplete soils in general, and all these other things. And so, yeah, and this is, you know, main form of public transportation, bicycles, walking. And this is our community school, which the community built and funded and pays the teacher so that the little kids don't have to walk 7K to school.
So the government is so poor that the government is not even able to provide a school.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, they do provide primary schools, but a lot of the problem is, I mean, it's lack of funds, but it's also that Zambia is so spread out. I mean, it's kind of like Montana, right? We have all these little rural, like 1-room schoolhouses here and there, but we have busing systems to get people to schools. And in Zambia, that just doesn't exist. And so, you know, you can only afford to build so many schools. And so you might live in an area where you're 10, 12, you know, 15 kilometers from a school. We were only 7. Yeah, it's just tricky. So yeah, so with that general background, any ideas for what Mfuba might need, or what you might do to sort of start to address development needs there? Anyone? Or like how you would start to get to, yeah.
Maybe introducing newer technologies for agriculture, or even just, you know, bikes so
Mhm.
kids can get to school easier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's a great. Yeah, like bringing like, you know, bicycles so people can get around, and yeah. Anybody else?
Well, what about some sort of oxen bank, or
Mhm.
like mule bank, where like you get one, and as it has a baby, you have to give the baby back to the group that gave it to you, like heifer does. That sort of
Yeah,
thing. So-
yeah.
So that it's spreading, so it's not just that you get one, but then the next baby animal goes to somebody else, so that it's
Mhm.
spreading. And even just a mule to help you with your, farming would be really helpful, or transportation.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
great.
Yeah, exactly. And those are great. Anybody else? Last chance. And those are great ideas. But so the Peace Corps approach, so there's a little problem with that. One is that Peace Corps, does not give things and money in general. There are some grants that you can apply for, which take a little longer. But in general, you know, we're coming into community saying we're not giving things, we're giving knowledge. We're helping you with the resources that you already have. So it's a little tricky. And then also there's a big focus on getting the community to take ownership of projects. And you know, you're kind of looking at things for the long haul if you can. But yeah, so Peter, this is I think this slide is my nod to you. So I love these, right? So these are have you guys ever seen those top two before?
I've seen that one, the toughest job.
The toughest job you'll ever. It's a very like Peace Corps thing, and life is calling. How far will you go? These are like, but then Peter made this, and I really like it because it's also, you know, you go into these communities and you're like, I'm going to make a difference, and I'm going to get them these things and everything, you know, and then you get in and like things are challenging and hard, and you don't know the culture and lack of resources, and so yeah, it can be really challenging. Yeah. So just briefly, the goals and the mission of Peace Corps. So there is this one that everybody thinks about, which is helping people with skills, bringing knowledge and skills and help and resources to the community. But these other two that people don't think about as much, which are basically intercultural exchange, like helping people to understand a little more about America, and then coming back here and talking about Zambia and sharing my experiences with you so you know a little bit more about these countries that you've never heard of. And so, you know, a lot of my service, which I'll talk about the work part, but a lot of my service was just hanging out, eating uwali with people, and having them be like, so in America, does this happen? So in America, is it true that two men can get married in America? And just all these, you know, and then you have to be like, how am I going to answer? Yes, they can, in some places. And so this is a Bemba proverb, Mweni wakolwe alia utukolwe aliako. And this is basically their version of when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? And so that, again, that's really the Peace Corps approach to development, is you're coming into the community. Before you even start in your community, you get 3 months of training in language and culture and technical skills that might be of use to you, health and safety, all these things. And then once you get to your community, you're supposed to take 3 months to not even do any work, to just get to know people, talk to people, interview people, find out what the resources are, where the school is, where the clinic is, who are the important people, or the people who are movers and shakers who know what's going on. And also just to learn to eat what the hosting monkeys eat. So yeah, so obviously these are all the, you know, like I learned to carry water on my head. This is me making a drink that is delicious if you put sugar in it, called amonkoyo. It's like maize, it's like a maize drink.
Like beer?
No, but there is definitely that. Yeah, people definitely brewed beer out of maize, millet, cassava, sweet potatoes. But this one is non-alcoholic. You could ferment it and it would eventually be. But yeah, we were cooking this up for a big party. This is my house, so I did have the thatch roof. I was, in Zambia we would say, I was a bwana, a rich person, because I lived in this place all by myself. And I got this little storage shed built onto the side of it because I was tired of having my bicycle in my house. And although I knew, I mean, I could have locked it to it and it would have been fine. My host in the village and my head man was like, no, someone could steal it. You have to keep it in your house. I was like, all right, I'm gonna build a shed because I'm rich. That's one of the challenges about being in Peace Corps too, is that, you know, you can do these things that maybe other people can't. And then this is the obligatory. When my brother visited, he insisted that I demonstrate how to use the squat pit toilet. I do have my pants on, but that is my pit toilet, and it was a hole in the ground.
Well, the good thing about that is you didn't need water or toilet paper. Or...
Oh no, I still use toilet paper. I mean, not everyone does. But yeah, water.
I don't know, corn husks.
Yeah, that probably would have been. If I was trying to be more environmental or something, I would have, been like, but no, I use toilet paper. But yeah, no water. So, because I carried all my water. I mean, that actually is what I did. Because our well was a well that belonged to a family, and I just went across the road. I was pretty close to my water source. Some people were maybe a kilometer away from theirs, but I was close to my water source, and I would just, so, you know, you got to think about how much water, how often do you want to bathe? Do you want to have that garden that you have to water all the time? And I did, but it was challenging.
How many hours a day did you spend carrying water?
Well, in the rainy season, not so much. You can collect water, and I did. In the dry season, when I had a garden, I couldn't quantify it. And gosh, I should have written this down. But I remember at one point, like counting how many buckets I was pulling up every day. Is that in the next? Anyway, you'll get to a picture of our well at some point, but there was a bucket that you pulled up on a rope. And I remember, like, it was something ridiculous. Like I was pulling up, I don't know, 40 buckets a day or something. I don't know if I ever have, but anyway. But again, it's one of those things that I think these are the things that people talk about in Peace Corps. It's like, oh, these are so hard. You don't have electricity and running water. But I think those are the things that you just get used to. You know, I don't know what your service was like, but
I had electricity and
yeah.
and it was years before you. So.
Yeah, exactly. It really just depends where you are, right? Again. But yeah, I mean, I think those intercultural exchanges, learning the language, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to figure out what kind of work you're doing, those are the real challenging things. And then again, kind of going along with that, we had the director of our program in Zambia always said relationships first, work second. And I really liked that because again, doing any kind of development work, I mean, you know, how would you feel if a Zambian walked in here and was like, hey, so I've noticed Missoula has this problem with its bus system. It's really terrible. And we've got much better buses in the capital of Zambia. So we're going to help you. And you'd be like, who are you? I don't, you know. So trying to get to know people, which is hard in just 2 years. But yeah, just learning to do all these things. This just a side note, this is my host sister Joycey, peeling the spiny things off of pumpkin leaves, which are delicious. Even the pumpkin leaves here in America you can eat if you cook them. And I kind of mentioned this already, I guess this is a little out of order, but the Peace Corps, you know, what do the hosting monkeys eat, right? How do you figure that out? How do you, when in Rome, how do you know what the Romans do? And so you have that 3 months of in-country training that I mentioned, and then the 3 months of community entry in your new home. This is my host family that took care of me for 3 months and taught me what was going on as far as Bemba culture and language and stuff. And this is just us planting, you know, a garden in Zambian conditions, learning how to roast groundnuts, which are peanuts. So again, Peace Corps really stresses that integrating in your community, language. Yeah.
I have some questions. So you did your training in the same place where you served, or was it somewhere different?
No, it was different. Yeah, it was just outside the capital, so it was a really bad road. I couldn't tell you how many kilometers. It was like an hour and a half outside the capital, but I don't think it was that many miles. It was on a bad road. So it was still a rural area, still no electricity, no running water. My family spoke Bemba, but it was like a lot more metal roofs. They were more developed in degree, but overall it was still very similar to where I was. Yeah.
And so during your training, you feel like you got enough language to
Yeah, I mean, to get by, I think language is challenging for everybody. I did pretty well at it. I'm kind of a language person, so I probably picked it up, you know, quicker than some people. But I mean, you know, it was three students to one teacher, and all the teachers were Zambian, and we had some really good teachers. So, yeah, it's enough to get by.
learn Bemba?
No. Well, I mentioned there are 72 languages, so Peace Corps volunteers don't speak all of those languages, but kind of the main languages, I think 7 of them, I'd have to like really count, but I think Peace Corps volunteers speak 7 of maybe 8 of the languages, but they're sort of more commonly. And so even a lot of areas where this really small, uncommon language might be spoken, still a lot of people would know, like Bemba or Nyanja, which were the more or Tonga, the more common languages. So yeah, I think we learned about 8 of them as a group.
I'm sorry, I have lots of questions.
Yeah.
Is this common now, how they do the in-country training, or is it by country? Because, I mean, we had like a week's homestay, but we did not have to stay very long with the host family. We were in hotels.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know what point that's changed, but I think Peter, did you have a similar situation?
Yeah, 3 months I'll say.
Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty much the standard now. I could be wrong, but I mean, it's definitely 3 months of training in the country. I just don't know the particulars of a homestay situation. I mean, I have a friend who served in Nicaragua, it was the same. As far as I know, that is the standard now. Yeah, it's great, because it used to be when Peace Corps started, I think they had a week's training in America, and they dropped you off. So yeah, we're extremely fortunate that Peace Corps has come very far since 1961. And again, in these community entry, these are just some of the like activities you can do. Community mapping is that I talked about finding where the resources are. So for me, that was more helpful for me to know where things were, but also my community, help. Oh, you have a wetland here with like, and some people are already gardening here on the edge of this wetland. Like maybe that's a resource for other people, or where is the clinic? Where is the school? Would it be useful for me to work with the school? What kind of crops are you growing? The seasonal calendar, when do people have food? When do they not have food? When are there big celebrations? When does all work stop because they're harvesting caterpillars? Which we'll get to. Just getting to, again, tools for getting to know your community. And then, so I think a lot of volunteers still do some work in their first 3 months, but really you're supposed to not do any work and just get to know your community. And then and then needs assessment also is that more asking your, kind of finding out like, well, what do you really need and what would help you most? And that all is due to this proverb, Abe kalamunshi yampundu e bomfwa e koshipona, which is the impundu tree, which is actually this here. Delicious fruits, like such delicious fruits. And the resource, and it's the idea that, you know your own resources better than other people. And also, someone also told me that, I got 2 different versions of this proverb. Someone also told me that people don't value what they have if it's commonly available. So maybe it means that, but anyway, that could be, but that could also play into it too, where you don't maybe realize the resources that you have. Maybe an outsider comes in and is like, oh, this is great. You could have a garden here. Who knows? So yeah, like I asked you that question about how you might help Mfuba develop, but what kind of resources do you think from just this brief intro Mfuba might have that would be beneficial for addressing some of the challenges?
You said they have sugar cane, so that must mean that they have sugar cane crops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like potentially something that could be sold or, yeah, sugarcane was actually real. There were not a whole lot of people gardening or growing sugarcane in my area, but yeah, some were, and for them it was a good income source. And like maybe more people could grow that or.
You mentioned the wetlands,
Mm-hmm.
so that, like you said, they could garden by the wetlands and not have to carry the water so far.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned worms.
Caterpillars, yeah, caterpillars, yeah. I should probably talk about that way sooner, but and I will. But basically, for about 5-6 weeks out of the year, people do eat caterpillars, and they're delicious if you fry them. If you boil them, not so much. And people, it's huge for nutrition because it's a great protein source. It's also just culturally significant, right? It's like our pepperoni. I mean, pepperoni's kind of gross, right? What's in that? It's the thing that people are really excited about, like caterpillars. It's part of our culture. They think it's delicious, but it's also they also sell it. That is one of the things that they do sell, and quite a bit of, because my area still had a lot of trees, and the caterpillars live and feed in the trees and hatch in the trees. And so in areas where there were fewer trees or the trees had all been cut down, they would pay, in cities, they would pay a lot of money for caterpillars. So that was a huge resource, yeah.
I don't think of a caterpillar as being a resource.
Yeah.
In my garden, I pick them off and smash them because I don't want them to eat my vegetables.
Yeah. Well, and there are those ones too. They're different. There are caterpillars that are poisonous, and but they know the difference because, yeah, they live there. Yeah, exactly. So I would first say human resources, right? I think we rarely think of that, but again, I mentioned, like how long have people been living in this, like thousands of years that the Bemba are part of that larger Bantu group. Basically, they and their ancestors have been farming here for thousands of years. They have so much knowledge of what actually goes on there. I didn't realize I put him in twice. We have good, he was one of our best gardeners. People who are sort of already doing that. And, we have those people in our community too, right? People who are kind of ahead of the curve and trying really cutting edge things. Just a lot of native knowledge. These guys are burning tool handles, like they made their own axes. There was a blacksmith, and there were, the blacksmith was 10 kilometers away, but everybody would make their own handles and then, go to the blacksmith. She's making a broom. They are making, this is the Nsaka, the outdoor area where everybody eats. So people have incredible knowledge of, their resources and how to do things. And so, if you can tap into that, that's one of the challenges of Peace Corps is you come in and it depends on the country, right? Some countries they'll be like, American, like, what do you, like a little annoyed at Americans in general. In Zambia, in rural areas, people were like, oh, American! Mzungu was the word for white person. And so you would, Mzungu, 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 but it was said with like great joy. It was not like a slur. So you come in to my village and they were like, oh, you will teach us the way. And I was like, no, I don't know, and you think, and everybody goes in and I think, I definitely went in and thought like, yeah, I have, and then you come away from it being like, I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. And so that's why you work with, we call them counterparts in the village. Bob Better was one of my counterparts. Do I have? Yeah, I've got another counterpart. I'll just go to this. Ba Allen was one of my counterparts. Ba Jennifer, Bob Better's wife, another gardener. So you learn to work with people in the community because again, who's gonna listen to the white? Well, they might say and politely listen to the white girl and say that they're gonna do these things, but a lot of times they're not. And so, those are the resources that I think most about, like those human resources, and also, just knowledge in the community, as well as the wetland and, particular trees that have fruit, caterpillar, like those natural resources as well. And even not so much in my area, but some places you might have other nonprofits, you might have government programs going on, and that's actually a little bit of what we tapped into. So. This was my program. It's roughly agriculture was what I was grouped into, but linking income, food, and environment is pretty much everything in the world. And so it really is, and this is true across the board in Peace Corps, you will have your certain sector of what you're supposed to do, your health or education, or, but ultimately, you will end up doing lots of things that you never thought you would do because that's what your community wants or needs, or you think, oh, this would be fun. I've got some free time. Let's try this out. And so in my area, about 90 kilometers away in the district capital, we had this government research farm where they were researching all kinds of different crops, different ways of growing things, trying to increase food security, working with livestock a little bit. And I was able to get 10 of our farmers out there for a full day tour to learn about what they're doing. And they were all representatives of different groups. Some of them were just more well-off farmers, but 8 of them were from these little farming cooperatives that they'd found. And so you come back, so we went there, we learned all these things, and I said, okay, and now what do you want to do? Like what are these projects you're most interested in? Because the government was giving out seed, and so they decided that they wanted to plant a demo plot with new varieties of cassava and soybeans and groundnuts, peanuts, and beans. And they also really, really wanted, this was just one agricultural co-op, they really, really wanted to raise goats. And the research station was breeding local goats with Boer goats from South Africa, which Boer goats grow much faster, have a lot of meat, and they're more profitable, but they didn't do well in Zambian conditions, so they were breeding them with local goats. And so we were able to, through a lot of efforts in building the right goat structure and be part of this research project. And again, I feel like my village spearheaded that. They built the goat structure. They actually put up the money to transport the goats back. They did a lot of work on that. And so and again, and with the gardeners, because I didn't really know anything about gardening, I tried to work with those few gardeners who were really on it and really knew what they were doing and had been doing it for a long time and get them to work with people. We had some joint workshops, so that was interesting as well. And then the caterpillars. So I've kind of already talked about this, but I think there were like 6 different kinds. And I forgot, I could shout out some names, but I can't remember which is which, it doesn't matter. And again, people would come, because caterpillars were such a big deal in our area, people would come from even 80, 90, 100 kilometers away. And because Zambia is so big on extended family, everyone has a distant relative somewhere. So if you had a great aunt or a cousin or somebody who lived in Mfuba village or that area for that month of the year, you would come and you would camp out and you would just harvest caterpillars and try to make a lot of money. And so it was really crazy in my village for about 4 to 6 weeks a year. But one of the problems with that is that when people aren't from a community, maybe they sometimes don't value the resources or have the investment that the people in the community have. So I don't know if you can see this super well, but this is a bunch of trees that were chopped down for people to get caterpillars. So you could shake the tree or bend the tree down if it's small or climb the tree if it's really big, but that's a lot of effort and you're not going to get as many caterpillars. If you just chop the tree down, you can get all the caterpillars. But if you chop down all the trees that the caterpillars like, then eventually you'll have no caterpillars. And so in my village, this is actually a huge concern. The headman was trying to, deal with this, and they really wanted to become part of this government program that was honorary forest guards, where basically you become like a volunteer and you get a badge and you get this training and you have the authority to stop people from cutting down trees or doing illegal forestry practices. So we were trying to get them into that program. That was actually a lot more work than you think. And this is my counterpart bioline again. We did do some tree planting for agroforestry, like nitrogen fixing trees that improve the soils, and fruit trees for food security. That was something that had been started by, there was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in my village before me. So they had started that and we continued it.
So I have to ask about these caterpillars. How do you transport them to cities? Do you keep them live eating leaves, or do you fry them all and then transport them?
Yeah, actually what they did was, and this was another drain on the trees in the area, although it was mostly deadfall, but you would gather huge piles of brush and dead branches and put all the caterpillars underneath, and then they would burn it. And to me, I was like, that would just, but then they just chars them to a crisp, but they're like preserved. I watched them and I was like, wow. And then and when you wanted to cook them, so they were totally preserved, dried, I guess, and they would like literally pull them out of the ashes after the fire had burned down. And then you could rehydrate them and cook them. But yeah.
They came during rainy season, so it might be hard to like do a solar dryer or something?
No, actually that's two things. So it wasn't during the rainy season, it was actually right before the rainy season. Caterpillars came in sort of late October, most of October and early November, which is right before the rainy. It's actually the hottest, driest time of the year when they were at their harvesting age. But then, and solar dryers, I think would have been tricky with these guys. They're so, but that was something that a lot of volunteers worked on. We call it appropriate technology, which is like solar dryers and hands-free hand washing things, which I had one of, and like using a bicycle to charge your cell phone, because a lot of people had cell phones, but they didn't necessarily have places to charge them. There'd be a few people in the village who had solar hookups and batteries, trying to do these appropriate technology things that would actually work in a village setting. But I'm just not good at that sort of thing. So we didn't really work on that. And but yeah, solar dryers would be, people, some people would do that for like fruits and vegetables. I wonder, because they're pretty squishy, the caterpillars. It would take a lot of drying maybe. But yeah, that's a good. And then a lot of Peace Corps calls these second, imiti ikula impanga, which is small trees make the future forest, and they use it to refer to children, like raise your children well, they're the future forest. And so I went into Zambia not really being a kid person, but being like, there are 20 children on my doorstep. There are 20 children on my doorstep. And then I just got to know them and got used to it, and I love them. And so there were a lot of things that just happened out of that, like everyone wants to learn English and play hangman, and there was always drawing in my yard, and I had books and stuff. And this was that hands-free hand washing device that I was talking about. It's pretty common with Peace Corps volunteers. You can step on the stick, and there's a little hole, and the water comes out, and so everybody thinks that's exciting, and it promotes good hygiene. Like, no, let's wash our hands before. And then I did do some boys and girls clubs centered around HIV education and gender and communication, because HIV is still, it's much less than it used to be, but it's still a problem there. And then we also did, Peace Corps has a program called Worldwise Schools, where volunteers will write letters to, usually it's just you write a letter to a classroom in America, and I had a friend who had a second grade class, and because the community school was grades 1 through 4, we actually did not a letter exchange, because they didn't, there was no English. There were about 6 people in my village who spoke English. I didn't mention that. Might have been in a slide. But so we exchanged drawings. And so all these things, like I just ended up doing a lot more work with kids than I thought I would, which is great and really rewarding. But this phrase, so mukolwe pakukula epo afuna ipindo, and this is basically, they use this a lot for, like when kids are, young kids, they got to try out a lot of things and they might make a lot of mistakes and do some crazy things, but like that's what you got to do when you're learning and growing. And that is my excuse for why so many things failed in our village. And also just because development is hard. So these are just some of my Glow Girls, Girls Leading Our World is that girls club, just fooling around and pretending to be asleep. But I think I took on probably too many projects. I had a hard time just sitting around and being like, okay, like waiting for things to happen, which is a lot of life in developing countries. You're sitting around and hanging out with people. I had a hard time with that. So I think I probably started too many projects and a lot of them didn't get the attention they deserved. I am not really a farmer. I had done some farming, but my field was not good. So this is pretty much the totality of my groundnut harvest. Bana Maria, one of my neighbors, helped me to harvest it because she walked by and I was harvesting and I was being very slow about it. And she said, Terry, let me help you with that. And so we harvested together. My farm was great for community, like getting to know people. It was right on the main path through town. So it was great for it. People would be like, what are you doing? And I'd be like, well, I'm trying this. I'm trying to plant these trees that will put fertilizer in the soil. They'd be like, that's interesting. And so, but it was also, I knew who was going to the clinic and I knew what was going on in the village, like the gossip, because I was right there on the main path. So that was great. But as far as showing people great new ways of farming, not good. This is another picture of chopped down trees from the caterpillars. After 18 months of trying to get these people in the village to be honorary forest guards, and this is part of underfunding of government, our applications, we think, made it to the capital, but they were just gone. I mean, I called and called and called, and we just never. And so yeah, trees are still being chopped down for caterpillars, and people use those trees for lots of other things. And then this is Ba Bernity. Ba is the term of respect in Zambia. It's not Mr. or Mrs. So I refer to a lot of people as Ba. Ba Bernity, our head man, when we went to pick up the goats, and the goat thing also took a really, really long time. We went to this agricultural research station where they were doing this crossbreeding of goats. I had been in country about 10 months, and then it was a month before I left, before we got the goats. So you're talking like basically a year of trying to, and so the goats were still pregnant when I left, and I was like, well, you guys have had all this training, you've got the goat structure that you built, it's great, and go. And there was another Peace Corps volunteer who came in, who's there now. Peace Corps often has 3 volunteers in a row. So there's somebody there now who's trying to work these things out. But one of the 2 goats, a few weeks after I left, got hit by a car. And to put that in context, there were about 1 to 2 cars a week that drove through my village. It was just a dirt path. It was some guy, it was a Sunday, and he had been drinking, and yeah, and so the goat. And so there are all these things like outside of your control that you just will crush your hippie idealism.
That goat wasn't in the goat structure.
Yeah, well, that was only for at night. That was to keep them safe at night. But during the day, and there was this whole dispute in my village, and the researchers had told us don't tie up. So people typically would, because nobody has like big fences, but you would tie your goat on a string and move it throughout the day. And we were told by the researchers, don't do that because pregnant goats are more likely to like strangle themselves. And again, these goats were for research. I didn't go into this whole thing, but we were supposed to weigh the goats at birth, and then they were gonna come and weigh them every month. And then once that was all done, the village got to keep the goats. And so they were just like, no, like just let them roam, which has its own challenges. So, and people in my village were like, we don't know if that's a good idea. But then some people were like, no, we shouldn't tie them. So they weren't tied. Yeah. However, I feel like the silver lining in this is another proverb, Abalia mbulu bala palamana, which is they who eat a crocodile get closer together. And again, I heard slightly different variations of what this really means. But mostly what I got is if you're engaged in a very difficult task, you have to share knowledge, you have to get closer together. And so I feel like through all these struggles in my village, I got closer to a lot of people. And so these are just pictures of my family, some of the people that I was really close to in my village. Because yeah, we did become close, and that's probably the best and most rewarding part of Peace Corps service.
We don't see you eating anywhere.
I know, I have 0 pictures of me eating ubwali. None. I didn't even think about it. There are a lot of things that if you go into the Peace Corps, take pictures of things that you don't think you'll want pictures of, because it's all those everyday things you would never, but no. I saw me eating it in America. I brought some back to America and cooked it, but I didn't put that in this PowerPoint. And then also that imiti kulumpanga, growing trees make the future forest. I think something that a lot of Peace Corps volunteers take heart in is that, you know, you hope you spread some ideas. These kids learn, I don't know what they learned from me, but they learned something. You know, they got a different perspective. You know, this is not a place where you're gonna get people from other countries all the time. So, you know, they kind of got their eyes open to different things and ideas. And yeah, they're just awesome.
So this is a great picture of, it looks like an older sister with a baby.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, could
Yeah.
that be a project
That's
to try
Karina.
to convince parents to let their daughters go to school? I mean,
Yeah.
I know that they
Mhm.
need the labor, but still,
Mhm.
like, it's not fair.
Yeah, well, it was complicated in my village. So a lot of people did. It depended. Some people in my village like really valued education. Were like, I'm sending all my kids to school. Some people didn't really value it at all. They were just like, I need my kids home to work on the farm, and they're, you know, and that was like across genders. But yeah, in general, because there were some school fees and school uniforms in general, if you're gonna, not so much primary school, but if you're gonna have a kid go on to secondary school, which costs much more money, and the nearest secondary school was 90 kilometers away from us, so you either had to have a relative who lived there, or you had to pay for boarding for your kid. So at that point, yeah, people tend to choose the boys a lot. But there are so many, but I will say as far as this picture, and this is, you know, this is one of those things I think you go in, or I went and be, oh, the girls are doing, and it's true, the girls and the women do way more work than the men in Zambia. I think in a lot of developing countries it's pretty standard. And so girls will get home from school and have all these chores to do. Boys will get home from school and be like, we're gonna, I came across a group of boys like they play marbles with these seeds, and I'd be like, what do you do? I'm like, but I just saw your sisters, like they're washing dishes. I'm like, why aren't you doing anything? And one of the boys was like, because we're men. And he's like 8. And I was like, you are not a man. But yeah, there is this, yeah. So it's challenging. And I feel like, you know, for me and for most Peace Corps volunteers, it was mostly just talking a lot. And, you know, all those conversations you have when you're eating ubwali, being like, oh yeah, I went to university, and like education is super important, and like, why do Americans have all these things, you know, for better or for worse? And it's like, well, we really value education for girls, and, you know, yeah, I mean, we did have these camps that were, you know, trying to empower girls, but you're also dealing with a lot of cultural things, even with the girls themselves. You know, a lot of girls are like, I want to get married and have kids. Like, that was what, you know, and so that is my caveat for this picture, is that, yeah, there's the bad side to it, but there's also the side to where the kids are like, it's like they kind of like, I saw like 5, 6-year-olds like trying to pull up the water bucket because they want to be the big kids fetching the water. So it's, you know, it's a double-edged sword. There's a certain like pride, I think, that the girls take in taking care of their younger siblings. And to be fair, I also saw boys also carrying younger siblings on their backs. But then, yeah, there are the realities of like really big families, and you tend to prioritize boys.
Did you guys
Yeah.
get involved at all in education about family size? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we did a lot of stuff with HIV. When I talk about the HIV/AIDS clubs, we talked about birth control and like where you might get birth control, which was sometimes tricky to find. But a lot of that, like I had a lot of conversations with, you know, people would be like, male Peace Corps volunteers would come and stay with me, and there would be this whole conversation about how we're not actually sleeping together, we're not actually having sex. And you know, just all these things would just come up organically. And so I feel like me and the women talked a lot about family planning type stuff. And it was, some women were, but it was mainly in towns that people were more, it was becoming more common in my village.
Oh, I had a totally different experience. I had to always keep them, if a boy came to visit me, they had to stay somewhere else. Or if they stayed at my house, I had to go somewhere else.
Yes, I mean, probably that would have been the yeah. Yeah.
My reputation, it would be terrible.
Yeah, I always wondered what my reputation was. I had I had so many interests, and this is the part about like learning to speak the language. There was not a woman in my village who spoke English, and so I would not have been able to have these conversations if I would have only been speaking to the men and having a translator. And so it was great getting to sit around with these women and then like telling you these crazy things, and yeah. Yeah. All right. Oh, and also I always put in this picture for trust because this is Melba. She, for the first year I was in the village, screamed and cried hysterically every time I came by. She wasn't the only kid, but she was the most. And this was the first time she ever smiled at me, and I happened to have my camera. So. Trust. So now we get into the little brief nitty-gritty of Peace Corps. Again, a lot of this will be kind of redundant, but these are all the countries that they work in. Again, 45% of Peace Corps volunteers do work in Africa, but lots of other places too. I mentioned we have 4 of these sectors in Zambia, but different sectors in different countries depending on your skills. Education is really the biggest need right now, so if you think you'd be interested in Peace Corps and you'd want to do education, and I think it's pretty much always the biggest need.
So I should say, you don't need to be an education major or be getting a
Yeah.
teaching certificate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for all these jobs, it's a combination of your degree and your skill set. So maybe like me, I was an agriculture volunteer because, well, it's changing a little bit. I think I don't know if I would have gotten in as an agriculture volunteer now. It's becoming more competitive. They're doing more skills based, like they want you to have those skills. But if you've worked on a farm, if you've had a garden, if you've, maybe your degree isn't in education, but you've done tutoring, health, maybe your degree isn't in health, but you've worked with like HIV/AIDS communities, or you've done health education. So it's a combination of your degree, your work experience, your volunteer experience, and even just, if you grew up on a farm, or if you, grew up speaking French, that's, obviously a skill as well. So, yeah. So it depends. Then community economic development is another one. People who are business majors, this one is really competitive. Some examples of what community economic development volunteers might do. Environment, my program was kind of straddled environment, agriculture. So we worked a bit on tree planting and environmental education as well.
I love that picture. Are they catching fish?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Whatever they have on their heads.
Yeah, this is a Peace Corps slide, but that is, I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing. Yeah.
Look at the baby on the front one. He's got a baby too in her little carrier.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's so common, like a woman with like a baby on her back and a big load on her head, and she's like coming back from the fields where she was working with the baby on her back all day. Yeah. Youth and development is another one. This, I feel like it overlaps a lot with education because everybody who works, well, most Peace Corps volunteers work with youth, but especially education volunteers. But these are some of the things that you might be doing in youth and development. Agriculture, a lot of what I talked about.
Can I ask you a question? Do they get it better arranged now so that, you mentioned having 3 months at your site to just learn how to fit in before you had to start?
Mm-hmm.
Because, for instance, they sent me to my site,
Mhm.
and the term had already began. So I had one day, and then I was starting to teach like right away, and it was so discombobulating. It was very difficult.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer that question because I think it really depends on the country. I know that our education volunteers, they set it up to where your training coincides. Can I ask you, Peter, because you were education?
Yeah, it depends on the country, and even each country changes from time to time, but they try to give education volunteers, they try to get them to site during a big break. So that,
That would be nice, because
Yeah, I mean, that's the- yeah.
worked out, and it was such a pain to.
When did you serve again? What year?
86 to 88.
Okay, so
I mean,
they'd been around a
literally, I
while
got
for
off
them,
the
yeah.
train, I went shopping for my bed, I went to my site, and then I started teaching.
Whoa.
Like,
Yeah, that is, yeah, that wasn't her, but yeah. So yeah, it depends a little bit. Some of the benefits of Peace Corps service, other than, you know, just an amazing life experience and great job skills, all these things. The student loan deferment is for federal student loans. If you have private loans, not so much, but you can get loan deferment and some loan cancellation while you're there. Safety and health. Safety is super, super important for Peace Corps. It's a big component of your training. I actually had the best health care I had had ever when I went to Peace Corps, because there's actually, you know, all your health care is paid for, and you get a dental exam halfway through your service, and if you need any prescriptions, they send them to you, so it's pretty good. And then as far as safety, that cultural integration and knowing the language is a big part of safety as well, because when you know what's going on and you have your, like, your family and your neighbors, like, they're gonna take care of you and make sure that you're safe.
And of course, just to point out, so for instance, when there was the Ebola outbreak, I mean, they had those volunteers out of the
Yeah.
country right away. I mean,
Yeah.
Or if there's a, you know, a hurricane or some big political
yes.
coup or something, they get them right out.
Yeah.
So it's not like they leave you hanging and you're wondering what's happening. They just
Yeah.
evacuate you right away.
Yeah, and that's happened in several countries, like Ukraine had an evacuation recently, like, yeah, so they definitely look out for you. There are also benefits after service. You do get, they call it a readjustment allowance. I think it's about $8,000 before taxes now to help you kind of readjust to America. You get a non-competitive eligibility for a lot of federal jobs, which basically it lasts for a year. And if you're the basic qualifications, you would get hired ahead of non-Peace Corps or non-military. Military have the highest ranking, but Peace Corps is kind of after that. And then just a lot of job postings on the Peace Corps website, companies who are specifically looking for Peace Corps volunteers, and also the Coverdell Fellowships, which are if you want to go to grad school after Peace Corps. It's about 140, and do I have this slide in here? No. About 140 universities that offer some kind of financial assistance to return Peace Corps volunteers, because they basically value those skills. They recognize that you've, you know, done this, you know, really interesting intercultural work, and, you know, they want that to be part of their universities.
That was my
So.
case. So I got 2 years free ride at a private university that's on the Peace Corps, and also I had really high grades, but
Yeah.
it was very nice.
Yeah. And these core expectations I put up just to sort of, like, these are the things that if you become a Peace Corps volunteer, you have to sign, like, I agree to this. And like, they kind of show you this kind of over and over again through the process, where it's like, are you really, it is 2 years of service. You know, you're on, you know, you're going to serve wherever the Peace Corps asks you to serve, even though now the application process is much more country specific. You can choose exactly where you want to go and what you want to do. But even within that, there are a lot of countries where you might be in a city or you might be in a rural area. And so you still have to have a degree of flexibility. You're on kind of 24/7. You are representing America. And yeah, people are always going to be watching you and, you know, looking at what you're doing. And all these, you know, be safe, be responsible, all those things. And then just the broader overview as far as applying to the Peace Corps, flexibility is still a big thing. Leadership skills, you do have to be a U.S. citizen. And usually a 4-year degree, about 95% of Peace Corps volunteers have a bachelor's degree or higher, but also work experience, tutoring, volunteering, hobbies are really important. And one of the things that can really prepare you for Peace Corps service, if I didn't ask, how many are you guys junior? What year are you're a 4th year, somebody with a 4th year, right? But if you're sort of freshman, sophomore level, the Peace Corps Prep program is a great program that kind of gives you those skills that you need for Peace Corps, and you can check that off on your application saying, this is something I've been through. These are the requirements, and it really prepares you to serve in Peace Corps and also gives you more specialized skills for whatever sector you might be going into. And it requires internship and volunteer experience as well. And then these are the big application deadlines. There's one that's October 1st, you're probably not gonna, but January 1st, if you happen to be graduating, that would be the next one for positions leaving in the summer. So there's constant, application deadlines rolling. And just as far as the application process, I do application workshops from time to time, but basically it's changed a lot to where it used to be you could express a preference like, I kind of want to serve in Africa and I want to do education. And they would take that under advisement, but you could really end up anywhere. And now on the Peace Corps website, there's volunteer opportunities where you can look a health volunteer in Moldova or a agriculture volunteer in Zambia, and you can really choose exactly and fit your skills to that. So that's changed a lot. It's also made it a lot more competitive.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a lot, yeah.
Could you still go in as just an undecided person and be flexible and then just let them send you where they want?
Yeah, there is still an option for any sector, all those work areas. So any sector, any country, you can still choose that if you want. And that just opens you up to whatever you're.
What was that previous slide talking
Yeah.
about? Is that requirements for the?
Sorry, I wasn't super, yeah, and I've got more brochures on. So Peace Corps Prep is a certificate program that you can get through the university here. And it's very integrated with the International Development Studies minor, if anyone's doing that or interested in doing that. They used to be very, very integrated.
Overlap.
Yeah, like if you got the IDS minor, you would basically get the Peace Corps Prep certificate. But now they've added these, specifically the 3 courses in your chosen sector. So that's 3 courses in health or education or community economic development, those sectors that Peace Corps works in. So now it's different and I think a little more challenging to do the IDS minor and the Peace Corps Prep certificate, but you still can do them together.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not a minor, it's like a certificate. And Peace Corps, yeah.
I'm a senior.
Uh-huh.
I thought I was doing the prep program through the.
So
Yeah,
You
if you,
may be doing it if you enrolled before
January
last
1st.
January, so this
I
past.
started it my freshman year.
So then you are under the old rules, so if you're
Okay.
getting the IDS minor, you are getting the Peace Corps Prep certificate.
Okay, that's
But
what I was.
just the-
yeah, you're like, wait, yeah, sorry. I need to-
That we grandfathered in anyone who
Yeah.
from before.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I'm glad you asked that because, yeah, I wasn't super clear on that. And yeah, this is if you signed up for Peace Corps Prep certificate after January 1st. But yeah, whatever your requirements were, that's what they are. And yeah, does anybody have any questions about, I didn't really, I didn't leave time for talking about applications or anything. I thought, but any general?
12 minutes or something.
Hmm?
There's 12 minutes.
Yeah. But yeah, if anybody has any, yeah. And so, yeah, this was Tuatotela Makwai. We thank you very much for being here. And this is all my contact information. So I do because I'm the Campus Peace Corps representative. I have office hours. Oh, I should put my office on there. It's 154 Lomason. I have one business card left. My last class took them all, if you want a business card. But yeah, I'm just in the Career Services building. And so you can come there during office hours. You can also email me to make an appointment at other times or call Career Services directly. There's a U of M Peace Corps website, and peacecorps.gov has events. This little bookmark, if anyone's interested in, has events that are happening in Missoula this fall, as well as on the backside online events. Peace Corps puts up a ton. I mean, almost every day there's some kind of online seminar about applying to Peace Corps or Peace Corps volunteer stories. So there are a lot of places if you want to learn more about Peace Corps specifically. And then, yeah, I'm always reachable if you have questions or if you want to apply and have questions about the application process.
Well, thank you. That's so interesting. Questions?
Yeah, and we do still have time for questions.
So does the Peace Corps limit people from applying if they're married or if they're without a certain age range, like if they're outside of that?
There's definitely you have to be at least 18 years old. But we've had volunteers anywhere from 18 to, I think 89 is the oldest I heard recently. Yeah, so any age can serve. Married couples, you definitely can serve together, but both of you have to qualify. So basically you're both volunteers. It's not like you're a volunteer and your spouse comes and they're along for the ride. You both have to be Peace Corps volunteers, which means you both have to qualify. You have to find a country that has the programs that you both qualify for. But when you go to the Peace Corps website, there is under the Peace Corps volunteer opportunities, anytime you click on any of those volunteer opportunities, it will show whether they accept couples. And you can even, there's a great filtering where you can filter it by region or by work. You can look for only health jobs in Latin America that accept couples. And you can see, so yeah.
So that being said, like if my husband isn't interested in going or has some other like engagement, I can't apply as an individual. I have to apply.
No, you could apply as an individual, but you would be away from your husband for 27 months. And if you, I'm sure Peace Corps would ask, there is an interview if you qualify, they interview, and I'm sure they'd be like, are you sure this is going to be okay for your marriage? But yeah, I mean, you can do that, for sure.
Just going to add to that, more recently, you can serve not as a married couple, but just as a couple, and that goes for same-sex couples.
Thank you. Yeah, you don't have to be married anymore. So that includes gay and lesbian couples as well, depending on the country. And I think, unmarried couples of any gender can now. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because, Thailand, they didn't mind gays, but even if you had a heterosexual couple that was blooming during training, they would not put you near each other. They would separate you as far as possible.
Interesting.
They didn't want anything going on.
Wow.
So
Times have changed.
and then they separated them, and then they all got married anyways.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
Yeah, a lot of people get married. People end up marrying people from Peace Corps. So.
We are so lucky to have these experts, Peter and.
Yeah, Peter was the campus Peace Corps representative last year, but
to have
he probably doesn't. No, it's great. But he may not want to answer all the questions, but he could.
But to have them right here, because as opposed to having to email somebody or call them on the phone, it's so much easier to just talk in person and, have that real life experience. And it's good to have people who've been really recent, because you can see already it's changed a little bit, because it was years ago for me, and so things are not the same.
Yeah.
You say you could choose the country that you visited. So why did you choose Zambia?
Well, when I applied, so they just made these changes about 2 years ago. The changes happened while I was already in Zambia. So I didn't choose Zambia, but I did express a preference for Africa because I'd always wanted to live in Africa. That didn't make it on here, but there's a slide somewhere that says, to keep your mind open to different countries, because you might be happiest in a country you've never heard of, and I think that's part of the not a lot of people are going to choose Zambia, and so I wonder how that it's interesting, this new Peace Corps process, because a lot of people have never heard of Zambia, never mind would choose it to serve as a Peace Corps volunteer, and so yeah.
I can see what they're doing a little bit on the website, because some countries like Costa Rica are so popular they don't have to extra advertise, but if they have ones that aren't filled, they move them to the top and say urgent need.
Yeah, there's actually, if you're looking at the volunteer opportunities on the website, there'll be a little box next to some of the positions that say featured. Featured usually means we need a lot of volunteers or we don't have enough applicants for this. So if you're applying and you're interested in one of those featured positions, you probably have a better chance because it's a little less competitive. They're really in need of applicants for that. Yeah, and it is just really interesting. You can just go on and say, oh, look, health work in Uzbekistan, and you can really tailor it now. But it also means that if you just pick 3 specific positions, I only want to serve in these 3 countries doing these 3 things, and you don't qualify for those positions, they're not going to consider you for anything else. So that's why if you want to be open and say I would serve anywhere, but you have to mean that, because if they call you like, oh, we've got this great position in Benin, and you're like, I didn't want to serve in Benin, they kind of get annoyed. But you can customize it. There's a little text box where you can say, I'll serve anywhere in Latin America or Asia, and so you can do it that way.
Just to illustrate
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you keep
Yeah,
that?
no, please do. I'm new at this. Go for it.
When I applied to the Peace Corps, it was 2008, so kind of in the same time zone she was doing it, but you couldn't specify anything. And I told Peace Corps specifically, please don't send me to Africa, and please don't make me teach. So they sent me to Sub-Saharan Africa to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And it's the best thing I've ever done. I wouldn't change it for anything. So I highly recommend, if you're open to it, just throwing yourself bodily into the deep end
Yeah.
and taking the worst possible scenario you can imagine, because it might end up being this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so, and I think it speaks to, I think there's this dichotomy of Peace Corps where it's like, you know, I think some people look at it, you know, everybody goes into Peace Corps for a different reason. And some people are like, this is job skills, and this is, I'm gonna learn a lot, which is true, and that's a great, you know, as long as you're gonna still work and recognize that it's gonna be really the toughest job you'll ever love, because it is really difficult. But at the same time, there is that element of like being flexible and just being like, I want to serve and I want to help and like wherever I'm needed most. And yeah, I think I think a lot of volunteers have. We had a lot of volunteers who were like, I really want to go to Latin America, like spoke Spanish. We had 2 fluent Spanish speakers who ended up in Zambia. Why? I don't know. But I think they both had great
I
experiences.
requested Thailand, and I got Thailand, so.
Oh, did you actually
How
said?
did that work? But they said they were gonna send me to Sub-Saharan Africa, and then they thought I spoke French. And I'm like, no, I don't speak French, I speak German and Spanish. Then they said, okay, we'll put you in Sri Lanka. But then Thailand got to bid on me first, so Thailand bid on me, and I'm like, that's where I wanna go. So it was a miracle.
Yeah, yeah. Huh, that's awesome.
Is this you with your hat?
No, you know, it's funny, this is a Peace Corps slide, but I kept wondering when someone was gonna ask that, because it is like, no, this is a Peace Corps slide. I mean, it's definitely in Africa somewhere, but I couldn't tell you where.
But it is characteristic that all the white people are confused for each other.
Yes, oh my gosh, everyone like, oh my gosh, yes. And if you had a volunteer, I was lucky, the volunteer who preceded me in my village was a 62-year-old man who was about 6'2" and he was bald. So we never ever, no one ever called me Boss Steve, but a lot of volunteers, if you were a man following a man or a woman following, I mean, you got called that name all the time because they were just like, you all look alike, you white people. And I'd be like, well, you guys all look alike to us, so it was just like our different, you know, like cultural reference frames. It's really interesting, all these things. Yeah.
Well, this is so interesting. I want to thank you so much. Give you a round of applause. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.